Now my great pleasure to introduce Elli Weisbaum. I was introduced to Elli by Mark Miller. If you were here earlier in the season, you know Mark, incredible lecture that he gave right at the beginning. Elli is going to introduce herself with more depth, and so I'm not going to try to steal her thunder on that. But simply to say that Elli has an incredible background studying mindfulness and the practice of careful attention from many different angles. And I'm so excited to learn from you tonight.
Thank you. Thanks for the introduction. Hi, everybody. I will take the clicker. Thank you. So yeah, great to be here. I go by Elli. I'm looking forward to exploring this topic with you. I was debating what to do tonight. I'm still slightly deciding. As a lecturer and human, I'm always like, all right, we'll check what the vibes are and see what we want to do when. So you'll help me kind of co-create what we explore and do together. Yeah, I'm excited to get into it. Before I go anywhere else, I just want to share a land acknowledgement. This is when I teach at the University of Toronto, and we offer this land acknowledgement at the outset of every class. I teach every week. We're not doing it like performatively, like check it off the first week. We're doing it every week. And this semester, I get to teach 2 classes, and so I kind of just get to take this looking in twice a week. So I wanted to share this with you. We also play around with it. I love to iterate and play with knowledge. We're going to talk about that in the session today. And so I often invite students over the semester to rewrite it, bring their own lenses, bring their own languages to it. So I will share this with you. And this was iterated from U of T's land acknowledgement. And you can see this reference here. I'm a bit of an academic nerd, so there's lots of references on the slides. But from this wonderful class, the Equity, Activism, and Education class, that was taught here that brought this together with the land acknowledgement from the Toronto Museum of Contemporary Art. So just an invitation, eyes open or closed, just to take in a moment to arrive here. We wish to acknowledge this land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it has been the land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. Today, this is still the meeting place to many folks from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the time to work on this land. We understand the role of settler colonial privilege and that this land acknowledgement cannot undo immensely violent histories against Indigenous peoples on these lands. As a community, we want to work to dismantle the legacy of colonial systems that impact all aspects of our practices to the best of our ability through our participation in this work and in holding ourselves accountable. We carry forward a commitment to listen, unlearn, and grow. And I kind of appreciate that invitation twice a week to listen, unlearn, and grow. I think just as a human, that's a kind of nice invitation. So if that's your only mindfulness practice you take, you've already done it, so tonight is a success. And we're going to jump into a few other things. Before I introduce myself a little more, I'm just curious to get to know everyone in the room. As a researcher, I like to think of this as collecting a little bit of data. So I'm going to ask some questions and just raise your hand if something applies to you. So just out of curiosity, who here would say they've ever tried some sort of mindfulness meditative something? Just raise your hand. Okay, great. Okay, hands down. Who here would say they have a ongoing regular mindfulness practice? Okay. Who here would say they think that's a good idea, but they often don't get to it? Yeah. Okay, great. So it makes sense. I've been a meditative-ish person for over 25 years, and I'm still in that category of how's it going this week? It was a hard week, probably a week to have been practicing. Was I? Maybe I was doom scrolling. So we'll talk about that. And then some other questions. So curious, who here would say in the last week they've had some anxiety? Who would? Definitely. Oh, we just started class. Yeah, okay. And just looking around, just getting to know. We've another question. Who here in the last week had a moment of joy? Yeah, okay. So we got some anxiety, we got some joy, we got some intentions to practice, we're seeing what's happening. I like to ask these questions. I often ask them in lots of different spaces, and often, as a researcher, I would say the data is fairly consistent and transferable between age groups. I've asked this in elementary school, I've asked it in business settings, in healthcare settings, in education settings, and it seems maybe as a collection of beings as humans, if we want to call ourselves that, that we tend to have some, curiosity about, we're going to talk about what is mindfulness, and like this curiosity about maybe if at the heart of that is like some way of like looking into ourselves, understanding ourselves. We're curious about that. We have some challenges getting to it. So there's some things in our society that are pushing us and pulling us in other directions. And then we have this, if you're, on the Buddhist nerdy scholarship side, Four Noble Truths, there's suffering and happiness. We seem to have this like, and on the Buddhist side, if we know it, Noble Truths can sound out there, but it's like something the Buddha proposed to be true for a lot of humans, which is that we have this potential both for like deep challenge and difficulty, our anxiety, our fears, our worries, is like a natural part of our lived experience. And so is our joy and our happiness. And so that's really interesting to me, just to keep collecting this data. All of that was in this room this week. So that's kind of my first scientific proof for all of us. I want to introduce myself a little bit more, just so you have a sense of some of the different flavors and backgrounds I have. My general plan for our time together is to make sure we have time for Q&A. It's always the most interesting when we get to hear what's been cooked up. And I want to give you a little taste of a little bit of the kind of scientific evidence-y stuff, because that's fun to me, a little bit about some of the research I do, and then I want to actually share some like practical everyday things that you might like try out tomorrow. So that's kind of my plan. We'll see where we go. When I get excited about things, I talk fast. And I also do presentations sometimes at hospitals and grand rounds. So if I'm going so fast that you're like, whoa, you can like wave me down. I've been telling my students, it's just like wave me down. I can repeat something. We'll have Q&A. And I'm also going to give myself permission to go a little faster over the evidence stuff because I want to get to doing some practical things. So we'll see how it goes. This is my plan. So a little bit about me. Oh, yes, I wanted to ask you something. One more question. Before I talk about myself, just by a show of hands, I'm going to show an image. If you can relate to it, just like immediately raise your hand. Just, does anyone open their computer and feel this? Okay. Yeah. I'm just like, it's kind of my own research question for myself right now. Is I feel like every day I just like open these things and I'm just like, and so maybe something I was thinking about as I was planning this presentation, because it's alive in my life right now, was like, what are the things that I do on a daily basis that make me unwell or more well? And like, what is my relationship to them? And currently my relationship to my email is something I'm thinking a lot about. But before I start this presentation then, I might just have you take a moment to consider for your own life right now, and like careful with your nervous system, maybe pick like the 5 out of 10, decide where you wanna go, but is there something in your life, and we don't wanna make an enemy of it, we say mindfulness is always a practice of nonviolence, inside and outside. Is there a challenge? Like, I know my emails are causing me some anxiety and distress. Might there be something in your life that you just want to call to mind, like, this is something I might want to take some care of? And I want to be careful about language. This isn't like a fix, a change, a get rid of. My emails are with me every day. So it's like, I just have to think about how I'm relating to them. But if you want, just to maybe call to mind or be curious as we're in this presentation, is there a challenge in your life that you're like, that could use some care? Maybe this is feeling a little heavy or causing me some ongoing stuff. And like, as I'm listening to this talk, maybe I'll get some insights about it. So you don't have to hold it too tightly, but it can be helpful to kind of set a little intention. Is there something in your life that maybe you're just like looking into your relationship with it? And we'll kind of like hold that as the presentation is going. See if you get something. If this isn't for you, this is an optional part of tonight. You can just be like, nope, I'm here to hear a talk. No intention setting. I'm a little sleepy. That's fine too. Okay, so mine is as I'm talking to you tonight with slides that I already know, but I'm also kind of holding this in my mind so that I can also benefit from being here. Okay, so who am I? An entire ancestry of millions of years leading to this person right now that I don't have time to explain. But some titles, because we like to do those in our, capitalist society. But I do love these things. So parts of me to introduce. So I teach in the Buddhism Psychology Mental Health program. That's an undergraduate minor in the Faculty of Arts and Science here at U of T. And then I have a joint appointment to the Temerty Faculty of Medicine. And so these two spaces support me, and then a cross appointment to the School of Public Health because there's no Faculty of Mindfulness. So these are all places that we're doing some cooking of these ideas. And across these spaces, I have the joy of teaching undergraduate and graduate students, and then also conducting research. I'm going to share a bit more about my research, but that's focused right now on how these practices of mindfulness and compassion can be integrated specifically into healthcare and educational spaces. Bless you. Then I also do some work. I've been a collaborator with the Sick Kids Mindfulness Project for a long time, which is an initiative looking at how we can bring this in across the hospital. So I've had the joy to work with how this applies to clinician wellness, families, patients, staff. What would it look like to kind of build healthy healthcare spaces is an area of curiosity for me. I'm trained as a qualitative researcher, so I love to think about, like, how do we do really high quality research that's about human behavior? And the thing is, like, humans are messy and complicated, and so I really like to bring in research modalities that can kind of stretch the boundaries of maybe what we think science is, and do that in a really rigorous way. So I'll talk a bit about that. I'm going to jump down to the last title. I'm a certified teacher in this program that came out of Google called Search Inside Yourself. Got it? And this program brings together like neuroscience, mindfulness, and emotional intelligence. So I've also done work looking at how this would move into like business spaces. And then I have this title of being a member of the Order of Interbeing and a Dharma teacher, which is kind of a different hat than some of the academic research lenses. I had the fortune of being brought to my first retreat, attending my first retreat with scholar, peace activist, Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh, who was nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize by Martin Luther King, an incredible teacher from a Vietnamese Zen lineage who really looked into and is sometimes called like the grandfather of mindfulness, wrote a book, The Miracle of Mindfulness, published back in the 70s. And Thai, we call Thich Nhat Hanh Thai, short for teacher. Did a lot of work during the, depending on your lens, the American War, the Vietnamese War, to look into how these practices could help to energize and care for young social workers who were out in the field doing work. So during this deep time of war, of trauma, he spent time on the ground working with young people across the country who were rebuilding villages, who were doing really deep work, and he realized that they couldn't do this every single day. They were going to burn out. And so he said at least one day is needed to really like come in and care for ourselves. And so he started taking some of these teachings and seeing how they could hold folks who were holding trauma. And so I got to be at his retreats, and I grew up in this tradition. So I've also applied this as a kid, as a teen, as a young adult, and now in my work. And I've worked and studied with this community for many years. I was invited to be transmitted what they call the LAMP transmission, so when the community wants to invite you in to be a teacher. So that was a very wonderful experience that I had this past March. All of that is to say, I love to nerd out on the neuroscience and research and the Dharma. And that as a human, I'm like deeply curious about how different knowledge streams can come together and be complementary and inform each other. What is knowledge? What is science? What have we centered in our societies, and what has been left out? How can we have more dialogue? How does this inform us to create whole cultures that can be caring and kind and productive? And like, what do we want to problematize around individualism and competition, and what does that mean? So I have a lot of questions. And so recently I've been summarizing the Who I Am slide with just one point, which is, if it will come up maybe here. Yeah, I'm just an endlessly curious human. So if you forget all my titles, I'm curious, and I'm curious about what it means to be human. I'm curious what it means to be in relationship with myself, with other humans, with the planet, with my work, and hopefully this is kind of the conversation that we can have tonight. So I'll be bringing the lens from my work to this, and then it's fun to have a series where you're going like, how do we human together? What does that mean? So I'm very curious about this. So the first thing I want to do is define mindfulness, which I put these emojis here because I was like, I'm really setting myself up to fail in some ways because there is no one definition of mindfulness. I will say this is, a phenomena that has roots in almost every social cultural space around the world. And it's not like a commodity owned by one group. So there's a lot of things we could say. And then I can also say that as a researcher, when I put in like an REB, like an ethics review to the university or the hospital, they're like, right, but like what's the definition of the thing that you're working on? And so just to hold lightly, the multiple truths, as we might say, on the one hand, there's no one agreed upon definition, and now I'm gonna try and give you some definitions. So we'll do both. And again, I love this idea that way at the other end, we all kind of have some container to talk about this thing, because like all of you came here tonight and something said mindfulness, and you probably came maybe thinking you have an idea of what that is. As a qualitative researcher, I'm quite certain that we think different things, and that no matter what I say now, that will continue to be the case. But it's handy to have some containers around the conversation. Oh, and before I get into that, I'm going to just back up and say, I want to define, because a lot of the spaces I get brought into to research or talk about mindfulness, there's this term burnout that's being used a lot. I used it today about myself in a conversation with a friend. I was like, I think I'm having a little bit of burnout. And so I just wanted to put up this question before I get into mindfulness. What's going on that's maybe making us feel unhealthy? And I'm having fun with this. I'll introduce this table in a moment. I retitled this slide recently because I was curious about this word burnout, because it's getting used a lot, just like mindfulness. And I feel like when a word gets used a lot, it's like this good buzzword, like help me combat burnout using mindfulness, like bring me in, And I feel like when we use that as a society a lot, it almost like loses its meaning a little bit. Like I just hear that people are burnt out, and everyone's burnt out, and we're just like, okay, and then we're moving on from it. And so I was thinking about this, and I was thinking about the literature on it, how we measure it. This is one of the most common scale on any research you'll ever read on burnout. This is the scale. It's measured in these 3 ways. And I think we can get used to the term in a way that almost is like quite unhelpful, because if you read the literature, what it's really saying is that we are living and working in ways that are making us unwell. And that's what, like when I hear burnout, I don't necessarily think that. It's almost like I accept, okay, it's this thing, move on. But I was like, that's an interesting thing to pause and think about, right? When I hear everyone in healthcare is burning out, everyone in education is burning out, our societies are burning out. You're just like, I've accepted it as a thing. And I was like, wait, let's step back. What we're saying is the way that our education systems are set up, the way that our healthcare systems are set up, the way that our society is set up is making us unwell. Why is that? And so I think that's just an interesting question I put to you, and something that lets me kind of look into my life a little bit to be like, if I'm saying I'm feeling a little burnt out, then that means something in the structure of how I'm living is causing me sometimes to feel unwell. So that's just, I'll put a pin there, but that's an interesting thing. And I just want to share from the person who designed the scale on burnout. Also, you're often reading about her scale, but her writing, I will say, if anyone's interested, is quite beautiful. She has some books, and she really cares. So also to back up, and again, not just be it's a scale, it's a thing, what are the numbers, but what are we talking about? And so burnout is not a problem of people so much as it is of the social environment in which they work. When the workplace does not recognize the human side of the work. And so I think that's interesting, right? If I feel unwell, to start looking where am I just, back to that photo of the emails, right? When am I just being a working robot, right? If I'm not being human with myself, with my colleagues, with my students? Like, how is that affecting my actual health? It's kind of an interesting thing to think about. Okay, so back to this, what is this mindfulness thing? Because that's what we're here to talk about. And we're here maybe to talk about it in the context of like, how are we living and working and interacting as individuals, as societies? So I like to show this slide sometime, mindful or mindful. Again, we can collect some data. Who here would say their mind more often is like the busy mind of all their projects? Who lives in that mind state? Yeah, I think I spend a lot of my days like, what's every to-do list that I have? And what might this mean is maybe I'm not actually like seeing the trees in front of me. So this can be kind of our opening introduction to like, what is this mindfulness thing? And it might be that we're interested, and I want to be careful because back to mindfulness is always a practice of nonviolence. I'm not like attacking or making an enemy out of one of these minds. I'm really glad that my mind can hold lots of ideas lots of the time. It's very helpful. And I'm also interested in like, do I have some agency, some potential to choose to have the mind that sees the tree? To choose to have the mind that sees my friend in front of me and really hears them, right? So there's something about that. So as I said before, setting myself up to fail by giving you some definitions of a thing that has no definition. To do this, I want to kind of triangulate across 3 definitions from some different spaces to get a sense of what this mindfulness thing might be about. So I'm going to share a definition that comes from Jon Kabat-Zinn. Some of you may have heard of him. He's the founder and author of Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction, MBSR. So one of the most researched interventions offered at most hospitals in Toronto. So we have a kind of clinical perspective. Then I'm going to offer a definition that comes from the UK All-Parliamentary Report on Mindfulness. So this is a public policy report that formally suggested and recommended that mindfulness be integrated into healthcare, education, business, and the criminal justice system. And since this policy report came out, mindfulness, MBCT, has actually been offered for folks with relapse and depression in their like public healthcare setting. So we got clinical perspective, policy perspective, and then from the teacher that I learned under, Zen Master Thich Nhat Hanh. So you've got a Zen Master's perspective. So some interesting ones to kind of triangulate between. So Plum Village is Thich Nhat Hanh's community. So mindfulness is the awareness of what's happening inside and around us in the present moment. Then we've got from MBSR, mindfulness means paying attention in a particular way, on purpose, in the present moment, and non-judgmentally. And then from the policy paper, mindfulness means paying attention to what's happening in the present moment in the mind, body, and external environment with an attitude of kindness and curiosity. It's a lot of words. So what I want to do is just kind of see what consiliency they have. What do they have in common? What can they kind of tell us about this phenomena? So we kind of have these 3 buckets. We have awareness and attention, present moment, and then non-judgmentally curiosity, kindness. So just a quick little discussion of these. So this mindfulness thing that we're here to talk about tonight has something to do with awareness and attention. And so just like a quick scientific proof on this, can I get everyone in the room to direct your attention to the ceiling, redirect your attentional flow to your feet, and then send your attention to me? Okay, so just like a quick proof that you are in charge of regulating where your flow of attention goes. It's not always easy to send it where we want or keep it there, but that's where that regulation is. That's yours. So this phenomena that has to do with awareness and attention is something that you're regulating. Then we have this word, present moment. So this one's interesting. My colleagues at Oxford sometimes like to say, like, you sound really hippy-dippy when you keep bringing up, like, the present moment. But it's really important because the present moment, like right here, right now, is where we collect information to be human with other humans. Like, if you're in front of someone and they're talking and you're actually thinking about something else and you're not in the present moment, then, like, you miss the information. You just won't know what was said. So in terms of learning, of interacting with other people, right? The ability to be present is really important. So, and then there's other benefits to your mind not wandering, but let's leave it there for now. And then this last part, non-judgmentally, with curiosity and kindness, this interesting thing about the phenomena that we're gonna look at some like data on like what might happen if you practice it and why. And I hope that you'll understand that scientific data more from this definition, which is the interesting thing about the practice of mindfulness is I would say a lot of us are quite good at and trained in paying attention to present moment things. Like it's hard to do it all the time and our minds wander, that's natural. And like, you know, we've been taught in school, in our jobs, like you're answering emails, you're writing papers, you're talking with people, you're doom scrolling, like you're doing something presently. And yet are you doing it? And what I think is novel about mindfulness is this invitation to not just practice and train our ability to attend to something, it's to attend to it with a specific attitudinal quality, a quality that is kind and curious. So, like, how often are you doing something and you're like, wow, I'm doing such a great job. Like, go me, this is really nice. Or are we like, do it faster, you don't have enough time, like get this done, right? And it's not like and we have a negativity bias as humans because it's like better to remember that like you might get mauled by a tiger than there's like a beautiful flower. Like there's reasons that our mind does this. And how is that to live like with ourselves all the time? Like I looked in the mirror this morning and I thought something very unkind about my hair. And I was like, oh, Ellie, you just hurt your own feelings. Like the day is just like 5 minutes in. So I will say as we go through some of the ways that we might train our minds, that we might bring this practice off the cushion, right, into our daily lives, I propose to you, whatever you decide to do or not do that I suggest today, and you might find your own meditative practices, when we look at the literature, and I'm going to go into some of the benefits that have been like proposed through mindfulness. Shauna Shapiro is a wonderful researcher that I've worked with and published with. She published a paper called The Mechanisms of Mindfulness, if anyone's curious to get into it. But she was curious, like, what are the mechanisms that underscore these benefits that we're reporting? And she called it the IAA model, intention, attention, attitude. And again, it's just this. It's like there needs to be like an intention to pay attention to something. And then it's this like attitude. How are we paying attention? So everyone here has done a little bit of mindfulness practices in some ways. Can you raise your hand if you ever thought like, I'm doing this badly or wrong, like during a practice? Yeah. So like, that's really interesting. It's natural. And it's like, okay, if we're doing a meditative practice, again, I want to be careful because there's not like exactly like right or wrong way to do mindfulness. And the proposal might be though, like if we're telling ourselves we're bad at it and doing it wrong, we're probably not going to receive the same kind of maybe beneficial outcomes we're looking for. So this way of attending, right? Can I listen to an app and try a guided meditation and my mind wanders the whole time? And afterwards, can I be like, wow, I'm now aware that my mind was wandering and I'm having a really difficult day and I'm really distracted. Gold star me. Like what might be the kindest, most curious thing I can do every time I try a meditative practice? And so what are the benefits we see when we do this kind of activity? And we'll get into what they are in a moment. But I just want to say and again, references if everyone wants, but these interesting things. So, benefiting well-being, empathy, cognitive performance, better focus, working memory, academic performance, moral reasoning, along with decreasing anxiety and stress. So there's like a lot of outcomes that I think sound pretty good. And I put this slide up once at MIT and they're like, that's a lot of convenient things to claim like your field helps with. And I was like, yeah. So why might we see this? So just to kind of summarize, what I would propose to you is that just like we know if we're physically fit, there's a cascade of physiological benefits, so too, if we're cognitively fit, right? If we're doing a training that's designed for basically like mental fitness, you're gonna see a cascade of cognitive benefits. So if you look back at this list, you can see that's kind of what we're seeing across these benefits that this field is claiming, like, we can do all of this. And it's like, yeah, there's a cascade of cognitive benefits because we're looking at trainings designed to care for our cognition, which is not separate from our bodies. We can get into that. We're not trying to silo these, which I think is really interesting. And I think it's interesting to think about, like, as an academic, I often will say, like, the main tool for my work, like, is my own mind. So, like, am I keeping that in really good working order? Like, if you have a scientist in a lab, they're gonna keep their, like, microscopes in, like, excellent condition. And then the same thing for any of you in any field, right? Like, you're the common denominator for every conversation you have. If you're an activist and you want to, like, walk into a room and, like, get policy change done, right? If you're a parent and you want to talk to your child in a certain way, or your friend or your partner, like, every one of you in this room has spaces where you have a sphere of influence, right? Whether you're called a leader in your job title or not, every one of us have spaces where we have, this is from, like, the leadership literature, a sphere of influence. And I'm always really curious, like, the sphere of influence there is conditional upon the person you arrive as. And so are you keeping yourself? Like, what kind of working order are you in for the work you want to do in the world, for the communication you have? So I would propose, from reading the literature, from doing research in this field, from practicing long-term myself, my ongoing, like, curiosity around this practice is, like, how does it help keep the mental condition, the burnout, the, like, who I am as a human being, the hidden curriculum of, like, not what it says my job description is or not what I think a partner needs to be, but, like, when I walk in a room, who am I, right? All that stuff we can kind of taste from someone. They're like, that person's a great vibe, that person's a bad vibe. Like, what is that? So I think for me, again, that's a lot of what this work is about. Just before I dive into some research, and then we'll get to some practical things and questions, I just want to also, like, call in that I get invited to a lot of spaces to give talks on, like, mindfulness or well-being, and everyone's like, ugh. And so a little bit, I mean, you all decided to be here, so you're probably not that person, but maybe sometimes you are. And so I just want to say, like, I think that's kind of fair. And I think this is also because in a lot of spaces, mindfulness or wellness is kind of like this one-off pizza party. It's like, great, check, we did, like, the wellness activity, or, like, oh, we did a little EDI, or, like, have a pizza, and now keep working forever and answering every email. And so just to call that in, to say that that's real. It's important, if you're gonna share anything that I share later, like with a friend or someone, like, keep this in mind. We wanna recognize we're not trying to, like, give a Band-Aid solution to keep working in an unhealthy space. What I'm really curious about as a researcher, and when I bring this into places, it's like, how do I meet both the individuals and that the individual is not separate from the system? So just to say, like, we're interested in systems change, and systems are made of people. And so to really recognize, you know, the literature on burnout is really clear. Like, we want to be careful to not put the burden of, like, healing and care, like, on individuals, that we want to call in our systemic systems of oppression at the same time that we're, like, taking care of each other. So we need both. So I always like to say there's not one single solution that can address the constellation of challenges, and that they're all really here. And so we're kind of doing this dance between the individual, the system. What does that mean together? I'm going to take a sip of water. I hope I'm not talking too fast and that this has been engaging so far. Okay, so hopefully this makes sense. That was funny. I was like, did I put that transition slide in? And I was like, oh yeah, I said the thing that I like to say right now. So what can we actually do about it? I'm very interested as a researcher to not just sit in a room by myself and, like, theorize about things. I like to tell my students I'm teaching a fourth year, like, research methodologies through mindfulness course, and I like to say, like, good scientists are good storytellers. Because if you don't know how to tell your story, like, I know you're just, like, in a room coming up with things that go nowhere. So I'm always really interested in, like, knowledge translation and practical application. So I hope that's what we're going to get to. I hope some of the evidence base is, like, fun to hear what we're, like, how we're measuring things, what we're seeing as the outcomes, maybe equips you to be like, hey, this can get brought in here, you know? And I want to get to what do we actually do. So I want to share a little bit about one of the research studies I do, also because I think it's kind of fun just to hear, like, how do we research this stuff? And then my idea is to take 2 of the key top hits. I did a research study recently that I published on with physicians, and I want to actually share with you 2 of their favorite things from the mindfulness program. So that's the plan. So this is the study. Here's a QR code. It's freely available online if you want to read it. It was published in CMAJ Open, which is a Canadian biomedical journal. I was really happy to publish in there because they do a lot of quantitative studies. And I wrote to them and I was like, do you publish qualitative? And the editor was like, yeah, but it rarely meets our standards. I was like, okay, let's go. Because I was like, I really like the idea, again, of building bridges between different knowledge streams. So I was curious as a researcher. I was like, can I publish? And what is the language to articulate a research study looking at, from a qualitative lens, the impact of mindfulness training, specifically from Thich Nhat Hanh, on physician wellness in a biomedical journal? How do we bridge these kind of conversations? So if you read that article, you can kind of see some of the ways that I'm looking at how we discuss something that maybe could feel like soft science in a very hard science space. And what does that mean to be able to bridge and have those dialogues? So I'm not going to go through this in detail because you can read about it in the paper, but just for fun, so you have the framing. So perspective qualitative study, ethics approval through U of T and the Hospital for Sick Children. Used, if these words mean nothing to you, it's fine. And if you want to nerd out on them more later, you can look at it. But I did something called purposive sampling, which allows us to select the participants for some specific qualities. So we were interested in longer years of medical practice, less years of mindfulness experience. I was running a pilot, and that was the group I was curious to hear from, was physicians who accounted that they had none or almost no mindfulness experience. And had been in medical practice for a long time. I was interested to hear their voices. So when I share some of the data with you on what they experienced, this is the group that you're hearing from. We did observation, structured interviews, thematic analysis, and the whole protocol is also free online. So if you want to go dive into this later, you're welcome to. A quick note, mindfulness-based interventions, MBIs, that's like MBSR, they're in hospitals. To the best of my knowledge, none have been based explicitly in the teachings of Thich Nhat Hanh. So I was also interested in what are we centering in terms of the interventions that we use? And when we study mindfulness, what has been included or not included in some of our spaces? So I took some precedents that come from Indigenous methodologies in Canada to actually bring on an advisory committee from Plum Village in France to help me code and look into how the Buddhist monks do these trainings, and then to translate them into a 5-week program for physicians. So this was part of the experiment, and as I said, you can read more about that. Again, my just ongoing curiosity, how do different knowledge streams come together? What does it mean, if we have a space like healthcare, education, society, where we're burning out, what are we missing? Right? Is it that knowledge stream that's going to help to come up with the solutions or the approaches? And what other ways of looking and knowing can we bring in to kind of shift what we're seeing? This was the sample size for this particular cohort. So you can see physicians from across a whole bunch of different specialties participated, and let's hear from them. So the results was this interesting thing that participating in this 5-week training, 2 hours a week, getting introduced to some of these kind of foundational practices, ways of looking, ways of training, ways of talking about our wellness and our mind from this lens of Zen practice, we found that mindfulness became a way of life, was something that came out of the data, of the accounts of these physicians. And so I'll just share, as a qualitative researcher, we like to stick close to our data. I'm going to make a bunch of claims. Don't believe me. We hold them up to kind of data points, and those data points are the interviews themselves. So I'm going to just take a few minutes to really hear the words from the physicians. And something I always like to do as a researcher in qualitative work is to kind of stay context specific. So each quote will have the specialty and the years of practice, so you can start to kind of know who is the person who said this. So over and over in the data, we had this idea, way of life. A lot of the physicians were like, oh, I thought mindfulness, and maybe you can relate to this. They're like, I thought it would be something I did for like 20 minutes in the morning and then just like hope it held for the day. A lot of people think like mindfulness, the reason we decide on beyond the cushion is like sit with your eyes closed for 20 minutes, which is great. That will change the structure and function of your brain over time. And like a lot of us are busy. And so what is beyond the cushion? What else can we do? So I'll tell you what that is, but over and over, this idea that, I think the funny thing is that it's permeated things where sometimes I'm mindful and that's mindfulness, and sometimes it's just really infiltrated parts of my life. And I remember this participant, 13 years medical practice, accounting to me after the study. It was like 4 weeks later, and I was like, have you been doing any mindfulness since you did the workshop? And they were like, no. Oh, I'm terrible. I haven't done anything. I should have, like totally berating themselves. As a qualitative researcher, I was like, okay. And then I kept probing. And I was like, can you tell me, though, are there any like small things that we talked about in the program that you might have done once or twice? And then the same person who just told me they'd done no mindfulness and berated themselves for it goes, well, yeah, every time I get in the elevator, between these floors and I hit the button, just like you taught us, I take that as like my reminder to come back to myself. I stop thinking about the patients coming up, the ones I just had. I notice my breath. And yeah, like the next patient I see, I'm a lot more present. And I'm like, cool. Not doing any mindfulness. Got it. And even the person who was in our training where over and over we were like, mindfulness is all these things, was like, no, Elli. And I was like, oh. So just also to say, like, if you take one thing away from tonight as well, it's like, mindfulness is not necessarily the thing we think it is. I'm going to give you some options for this, but it could just be that moment of like, what's your daily bell that's yours? Like I try and set like one block on my way home is my mindful walk. Not on my way to work. I'm very realistic with myself. But this block on the way home, I've set it as like when I hit that block, can that be my moment? And remember the definition of mindfulness, right? Awareness of the present moment that is kind and curious. Can I take one block as I'm walking to just like know that I'm walking? I like notice my in-breath. Maybe I breathe like, I walk like 3 steps for my in-breath and out-breath, and I change the pace I'm moving, and all of a sudden like I notice trees. I smile to people I'm walking by. I can tell you when I walk in my front door that my husband can tell you if I did the walk or not. just by my walk. Just by how I say hello, right? And so some of those benefits, I get asked a lot, like, what's the dosage of mindfulness you need a day? I don't have an answer for that. What I can say from my own lived experience and from the data is these kind of like micro practices throughout our day as a way of life can really start to lead to those benefits we see. So if you're like, I don't have time for mindfulness, it's like, where in your life, one of the physicians I worked with was like, find the cost-neutral moments. Like, I'm already walking from my car into a building. Can I take that as like a moment of freedom to like be with myself and not with my projects and worries? Like, what would that be like? So it's a research question for ourselves, like brushing my teeth. It's this amazing time. It's this like amazing moment in my day where like I can just like care for my teeth. I'm like, these are my teeth. Like, I love you, teeth. Like, let's get better together. And I can write my emails in my head as much as I want when I'm brushing my teeth. And like, I'm still, it's like, what am I doing? And so you might look out for like, what are the moments in your day that you can put in some of these practices? So just briefly, because I want to get to some Q&A before we all fall asleep, because it's when I teach an afternoon class too. I'm like, that's like nap time. Like, we're not all supposed to be learning 1 to 4. So we found 2 key themes. I just want to let you hear a little bit more from the participants. So it's not just my voice, but like what might happen if I just started applying some of these practices, these ways of attending with curiosity and kindness to the present moment through how I speak, how I listen, when I'm in the elevator, like what does that look like? So we found 2 key themes. One was that mindfulness encourages behavioral and cognitive changes that benefit well-being. And the write-up talks about how this can decrease workplace stressors, resulting in a greater sense of wellness. As always, as a scientist, I'm like, please be skeptical. Don't take my word for it. And we can take the word of some participants. So again, just if you're not familiar with qualitative research, we really want to stick close to the data, what participants shared with us. So I'm going to read through some quotes to kind of give you a story of what I heard. Those are the blue parts. And then in the black, we keep parts of the quote there so you have the context. So why do I think this decreases work stress? Why do I think this creates change? So from a rheumatologist, 25 years, ophthalmology 5, cardiology 14, psychiatry 20. From being in the course, I don't bring back all of the frustration and stuff that was happening through the day. You just take a breath for yourself. You are less anxious. You are less worried. You don't panic as much. The mindful walking was good. Instead of walking and thinking, what do I have to do next? My day looks crazy. When I was getting to the meeting or to the patient, I was more relaxed and more present in a way. I think I am more forgiving with myself, with my patients. And so just to hear that, like, how would that change someone's quality of life, right? And even for yourselves, I say, like, how does it transfer to any space you're in? Like, these are physicians, but like, what would it mean to be more forgiving with yourself and like your colleagues or your students or your families, right? So when we talk about like societal change, it also gives me a lot of hope to see like what's possible after 5 weeks. Another theme was it improves communication with patients and colleagues. So we see benefits across delivery of care, work relationships, team dynamics. And again, what we're hearing from the participants around this. Irritability is a two-way street. I feel that awareness helps me step out of it. Normally it will just escalate, but then I think in many cases now with mindfulness, I will try and kind of step away and approach the situation in a more empathetic way. You come back to your mindfulness breathing and it helps you cope with almost every situation. It gives you immediately the way to react differently and better. So again, these things, like we all the time, and I have a few more here, we're just in constant reaction, right? We're getting stimulus, someone says something, we hear something, our colleague, email, like text, and like, what do we do? Like, how do we have some agency over how we are kind of metabolizing all this information? And for me, mindfulness is like this really interesting set of skills that we can develop to take care of that. And just to say the last quote here, mindfulness brought me back and probably being more compassionate, which makes me a better kind of doctor, a whole doctor. And that's really why I do this work, because I'm curious how we can, back to that burnout slide, right? When that human element isn't there, when I don't know how to be myself or to manage that can cause challenge. So the article has further discussion, directions, strengths and limitations. But I want to just quickly, before we open up for discussion, touch on a few of the top hits. So out of the data, we got, and this is all free online, by the way. Everything I'm sharing about the article, you can get on CMAJ Open, so it is yours. So there's some top hits of mindfulness that we heard from the doctors. I also just always like to stop and just deep bow gratitude to the participants who took their time to be in the study, and just so many mentors across the university who helped with this. And our current provost, Dr. Trevor Young, was a co-author on this paper. So just many thanks to the humans who supported all of this work. So yeah, let's talk about some top hits and then get to your questions about how you do this. Hopefully this has been inspiring already. I'm going to just quickly, I said that my husband Rob's a physiotherapist and he also does mindfulness work. I'm going to just call this fast interval training. I'm just throwing a lot of stuff at you tonight. And then please, my godfather's a wonderful cook. He says, if you have a cookbook, get one good recipe, it was worth it. So, you can revisit some of this later, but if there's one thing that cooks up for you, that's enough. So beyond the cushion. We're not tonight going to close our eyes and follow our breathing. We're not going to do that. And that's fantastic. I do that every day. So I highly recommend doing guided meditations, sitting meditations. I'm a huge fan. But I'm also, like I said, I'm curious, how do we actually bring this into daily life? What does that look like? And something that not everyone knows is a lot of the scholarship in this field of knowledge around mindfulness, there are practices, that's things like a guided meditation, mindful eating, mindful walking. These are what I would call practices. And then we also have a whole bunch of things that I might call concepts or theoretical frameworks, ways of thinking about our thinking that are as useful, as much a mindfulness practice as meditating. And so I want to very quickly teach you one of the top hits from the physicians. This is the one they were all I use this so often. It's called the 4 nutriments. Shout out to Thich Nhat Hanh, my teacher, who distilled this and taught this to me when I was in children's program, and I've loved it ever since. So the 4 nutriments is a 4-part framework, and I want to leave this with you as food for thought. Maybe this is the mindfulness thing you're going to use tomorrow. So it proposes that just like what we eat can be healthy or unhealthy, so can the other things we're consuming with our senses. So it proposes that you pay attention to what you're consuming beyond edible food. So what do I mean by this? So there's 4 nutriments that we talk about in this framework. So the first is edible food. So what you eat every day becomes part of who you are. We kind of accept this, right? And the phrase I like to use, and what this framework is proposing is just to start thinking about our relationship to what we consume. And I find it very helpful because it helps me kind of see things that I might not already see. So we can say mindfulness often is defined as making the invisible visible. And when something is visible, I can take care of it. Like if I don't know it's there, I cannot take care of it. And so I want to just say again, beyond the cushion for mindfulness can just be like, if I know I'm upset in the day and I'm like, I am upset by that, I'm like, great, my mindfulness practice working, because I know it's there, and then I can take care of it. So what you eat every day. The second, and just to say, the second is sense impression. So what you receive through your eyes, ears, nose, tongue, mind, and body, including what you read, what you hear, is proposed as another nutriment in this. So you are consuming that. It's becoming part of who you are. And this is really true. If I read and consume the news to a certain degree, like it changes who I am that day. A kind of nice way of thinking about the nutriments is like with edible food, I love potato chips. I love a plain salty potato chip. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? And there's like a more healthy or less healthy relationship I can have to an entire bag of potato chips, right? Because I might be like, okay, I want some potato chips, and I like take the bag and I put like some in a bowl, and then I just like go and I just like enjoy every chip. Like that's great. And then there's like this other way where like I'm working at my computer and like I stress eat an entire bag of potato chips, and then I feel bad in my body later, and I'm like, now I feel uncomfortable, right? And so like those are just 2 ways to relate to the same thing. And the thing itself is not good or bad. The potato chips are not good or bad, but I might have a different relationship. So like same for what we're consuming with our sensory impressions, right? Like the news is not, well, okay, good or bad, but like reading about events in the world is not a good or bad thing. And yet there might be a healthy way that I'm consuming that, and a way that I'm consuming it like the whole bag of potato chips. Like, am I just doom scrolling and unaware of how this is affecting me to the point that like I feel unwell later, right? And so coming back to this, burnout, unwellness, what am I doing in my life that is causing me to be unwell? And so I find that this framework can be a very helpful way for me to start spotting that in like a kind way to myself. Can I not label things I'm doing as like good or bad or right or wrong or like you should have done this or you should have done that? Can I just be like, oh, yeah, I can't eat 5 bags of potato chips. So like also like doom scrolling for 5 hours also makes me feel ill. And like that's okay. It might be that it's a habit that comforts me. And like that's okay. And do I want to look at it and be like, right, but like is there like the version of putting Instagram into the bowl rather than eating the whole bag without any awareness? Might I set a 10-minute timer? Like just like what are the things? How do I help myself here? Very briefly, because I'm going to wrap up soon, but just the other 2 nutriments that like are a little more out there, so I'm going to go over them quickly. But one is volition, this proposal that we actually consume our own deepest like desires and concerns, which is kind of cool. This has to kind of do with like our work. Like if we're an activist, that's amazing. We might like consume like wanting to care for our planet in a way that like motivates us to go out there and do it. And then we also might consume it in that like, oh my gosh, I'm so overwhelmed and have to fix everything and can never stop way. And that might not be healthy. So to continue to think like, what's the healthy version and maybe the less healthy version, like for my own nervous system in how I'm consuming this. And the last area is consciousness, which is just to become aware that we actually kind of consume our own and collective consciousness This might sound out there. I'm going to say it simply. There's some data and science behind this. But just to say that, have you ever walked into a room and been like, ooh, like this doesn't feel great? Like the vibe is not great in here, right? Like you kind of consume like that collective vibe. I've been like, gonna be honest, like off the record, on the record here, like I've been at faculty meetings at U of T, and you sometimes walk in and you're like, oh, great, and sometimes you're like, oh, what's happening, you know? So you can kind of feel it at like exam season. Like I walk into a classroom here and I'm like, whoa. So it's recognizing also that the spaces we're in, your workplace, your home place, is a collective consciousness that you and others are contributing to, and that you're consuming that on a daily basis. And so just to conclude this thing is like, we can think about healthy or unhealthy and how we consume, right? Different nutriments, different types of programming, and that they affect us deeply. And that this idea of like being aware of how they affect us, bringing this awareness, right? Mindfulness is the awareness of what's happening with kindness and curiosity. Just noticing it can kind of help to protect us, because we might make a choice. How much am I consuming this? What does it mean to be part of this conversation? So with that, I will leave one last thing with you before we open up for questions, which is mindful eating's fun. So just, if you're like, what else might I do with my attention? I just want to leave with you, don't chew your worries, your fear, your anger. If you chew your planning and your anxiety, it's difficult to feel grateful for each piece of food. Just chew your food. And so if anyone's curious, and we can share some of this out after, but this idea of just like bringing some curiosity and fun to your food. If you're like, I don't have time for mindfulness. You're drinking a coffee in the morning? Plum Village app, it's free, find other things, but like, how can you turn like drinking your coffee into like a moment of care for your nervous system? Cost neutral moment. Also, you get to enjoy your coffee more. Also, you get the benefits of like decreasing your stress and anxiety. It just like seems like it makes sense. So with that, let me pause. Thank you for listening to my ramble as we went through that. And I want to open up for some questions, which you said you have like, do you have a little like way of doing it? Oh, okay. Thank you. Jump in.
Hi there. Terrific talk, first off. What would you say to someone who struggles with sleep because of an overactivity of thoughts?
Oh, hi. Are you calling me in? Or okay, yeah. Yeah, it's such an interesting question, and I have so much to say about it. What I would say, one thing that I'm very curious about is how my day, how I'm living both my day-to-day, my week-to-week, my month-to-month, actually impacts my sleep each night. I come from, the training I come from with Thich, Nhat, Hanh, this long lineage of Zen thought. And there's there's many schools of thought, and one of them is called the manifestation-only school. I promise this is getting back to sleep. That can sound kind of out there, like manifestation only. It's the recognition, it's another interesting framework. What is manifesting is the product of the conditions around it. So often we're like, I need to address my sleep. And so we're like attacking this thing, or I should have done this in the day. And so, being upset that I'm not sleeping is actually a condition to keep not sleeping. And so something I like about this idea of manifestation only is it says like, what's the thing we want to care for? Our sleep issues, our anxiety issues. And to not go after that thing, but to, with kindness and curiosity, look at what are the conditions around it that's manifesting it. So what's manifesting is like a busy mind at night where I can't sleep. I'm going to look into some things that might be leading to that. So we know, for example, if you looked at sleep hygiene, like looking at blue lights at night can activate our nervous systems. And so, what are some scientific things that activate our nervous systems, and what adjustments might I make to those without trying to change my sleep? So what I mean is, what I have found is if I can love and accept my busy mind that makes me not sleep. So like every time I notice I'm not sleeping, I'm like, mind, you're trying to protect me, you're trying to care for me, you're trying to help me get ready for tomorrow. It's okay that you're keeping me awake. If I can have like a really loving dialogue with that kindness and curiosity to the not sleeping, and then at other times in my day when I feel stable, start to check out what are the things that are making this manifest. Is it that I'm on my emails too late? And what we say is, don't worry about the thing changing, don't force it to change, but slowly start changing the dials on everything around it, and put no pressure on the sleep changing. That's impossible. But that's the way. And I find that that can really ease it. I hope that starts to answer it, but I think
It
it's to be
does,
as
thank
kind
you.
and curious about the sleep as possible, and then put things around it that will change it. Yeah.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
And never-ending practice. Okay.
Hey, thanks. My question is going to sound maybe more skeptical than it is. So I want to preface it by saying, like, that mindfulness has been really important to me.
Oh, that's fun, though. I'm
And
just going to jump
super-
in to say, like,
yeah.
I had one of the surgeons in my study come and was like, I'm here because I think this is bullshit. And I was like, great.
Yeah, I think I'm trying to resolve something because I sort of both do and don't think it's bullshit. Like my personal experience is I've done a bunch of mindfulness. I did the Jon Kabat-Zinn program. It's probably like the central framework through which I understand my emotional life, and it's really helpful for me. At the same time, like when you put up the slides on those studies, my understanding, and then I'm curious, my understanding is that when mindfulness sort of first broke into the scene, there were all these super enthusiastic studies by people who are proponents of it, and that the studies from 15 years ago all show these great results, but when they've done more careful studies now and meta-analyses and all these things, that what they find, and you can tell me if this is wrong, but what they find is results that are like either non-existent or quite small and very, very comparable to other therapies. So mindfulness helps, but like as much as playing hockey would help, or cognitive therapy would help, or learning some relaxation exercises would help, and sort of small effects. And so I'm curious, I guess both if you think that's wrong, and then also if you don't think it's wrong, like whether it matters or how you make sense of it.
Oh, yeah, so interesting. I'll have to watch myself. I'm teaching like a 12-week course on this topic right now, and it takes that many weeks. But yeah, I love the question. I think I'll try and answer some different components of it. I think one, yeah, like a new pioneering field. And so like lots of excitement, and now we're like, okay, what else do we know? I think some interesting things also is, to your point, that we're going to see some like specific results around mindfulness in like pilot initial studies, which are focused on one phenomena, and now the field is old enough to start comparing it to other things. And so might it be comparable to some other interventions? Like, yes, absolutely. The other interesting piece, though, and something that I think we're looking at as a field, is like, what are we measuring and how are we measuring it? And do we actually know how to do that? So one of the interesting things I'll propose to you is I think some of the kind of smaller like traits that we're seeing is like as we're applying to mindfulness, some of our measures we have in other fields. Like pain is something we know how to measure really well. So we're like using that to measure this and to see if it's comparable. We're using a lot of like kind of quantitative perspectives on whether mindfulness moves the needle on health. And I would say there's some problems with that. We're going to see smaller effect sizes in that way. And I'll give you an exact example from a study I did at Sick Kids that was really interesting. So I would say also to your question, I don't exactly know why we're seeing that, but I'll give you this example to give some of my insight on it, because I think part of our problem right now is we don't exactly know how to measure this phenomena well, that we're in need of creating some further measurements. So I'll give you the example. So I was working on a CIHR grant. We were working with young people who have sleep apnea at Sick Kids. We were interested in looking at how adherence to using this machine would or wouldn't affect their adherence to like a medical program. What does that look like? And they were going to run through a mindfulness intervention study at Marseille, which is like an adolescent version of MBSR. And there was going to be quant and qual measures. And the quantitative measures were looking at some of the statistics around cortisol levels, some of the pieces. And across the study, there was no significant findings or movement on any of those measures. Okay, so from a quantitative perspective, we're like, are they still going to give funding? We cannot say that there's a significant impact of this. And then we had the qualitative data. And we're talking to, adolescents who went through this program, and they're accounting to us, like, for the first time in my life, I saw value in who I was as a person. And I'm going to start, using this machine more to help my sleep because I realize that I'm of value and worth. And so to me, I'm like, well, that's really interesting. The way we're measuring like certain types of changes, can we see whether this is effective or not simply from the ways that we traditionally do science or look at it? So there's an interesting question, I think, for us as a field, is like, what is a significant finding? What is it that we're looking for? And how do we start to find out, now that we're in this kind of later phase of mindfulness, what are we measuring? How are we measuring it? And what is significant or not? So I'm kind of starting to answer your question, but it's such a great one. And I can say, also you said, does it even matter? It's like, hey, if you feel better, if this is, your, what did you say? It's like the way you look at your emotional.
Yeah, it's sort of the framework through which I understand my
Right.
emotional life.
So like you as an N of 1 are saying like, this helps my life. And so does it matter? Or I don't know if that's what you're saying there, but it's brought some meaning in some way. So then I go like, as a researcher, I have to be careful, but like, does it even matter if I can ever prove it? And so it's an interesting question.
Cool.
Yeah,
Okay,
so thank you. I hope that started to cook it up, but
sure,
it's
thanks.
really interesting.
So a lot of this work feels, it seems very self-focused, right? It's like you go to, you work out, you become physically fitter, you do mindfulness practices, you become, cognitively more healthy. Even when you're thinking about kind of like how people relate to each other, it's questions around, it's helping me to address my biases and to like see the problems that I have internally, right? So it's very kind of like self-focused, right? And when you look at traditional Buddhist communities, so you look at monastics in Thailand or Japan or kind of like anywhere in the broader Buddhist diaspora, and they think about these mindfulness practices, they're often thinking about like, oh, I need to be like blessing this person very effectively, or I need to be like creating a really effective daycare, or I need to understand this other person and what's happening in their lives. And it feels like a lot of this mindfulness discussion has this very kind of Western style, individual improvement kind of mentality associated with it. Do you think that that limits the potential effectiveness of this as a way for our culture to evolve or to improve itself in some sense? That we've taken a practice that used to be very communal in some ways and have actually made it very individual.
Yes, great. Oh, these are so good. This is, again, like, you're asking me the questions, like I said, that, like, we're literally, like, the entire field is asking, and we're talking about for 12 weeks, so I keep trying to, like, and, again, I love this question, and I think there's a few angles to come at it with. First off, like, yes, we would say, like, in the Zen tradition I'm trained in, like, caring for our inner landscape and our territory is a really significant part of this. And it's often where we begin. It's often, and if that's where you stop, like, you've missed the program. Like, just like categorically, like Thich Nhat Hanh would be like, it is about action in the world. And so what is that balance? And a critique in the literature in terms of how we've done some adaptation. We can get into like appropriation versus appreciation. What does that look like in this field? So there is a critique that it's been over-individualized and self-focused in like Western, global North, particularly North American contexts. So that is a critique of a lot of these things. And at the same time, it's kind of interesting because I've sat and like talked with, some of the Zen Buddhist monks, and you're like, what do you think of this? And they're like, well, it's great because like people are going to wind up caring for the whole planet if they do this work anyway. Like, surprise. So it's, it's kind of, there is something embedded, I can say, from all the data I've collected that over and over, when folks are caring for their inner territory, if the motivation is like my own anxiety, my own health, which like often in our transactional society, like that's what gets us in the door. And so this balance of like, how much do you meet the social cultural context in a way that makes it safe? Like I sometimes think of our societies or institutions, like they have their own nervous systems and histories, and we need to meet them where they are with care. So like, is it okay to walk into a business and be like, this is gonna help your bottom line, let's go. But like, we know we're training everyone in love and compassion. It's like, that's probably worthwhile. So there's that kind of end of things. And many of the Buddhist scholars saying like, this is made to be open access. And at the same time, like, are we citing our sources well? Where are we, just like citing like white psychologists and not being like, this has these deep roots. And so, yeah, as an academic and researcher, I'm really curious. How do we honor those spaces? And then also, how do we keep in mind this broader piece? And to the question that was just asked before, like, where are we as a field? I think we're at a place where we can start really bringing back in those lenses. Final note on this, just to nerd out on the Buddhist side, we would say there's often at the heart of practice, we say there's the three jewels. The Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. And just like the quickest definition of this, it's this three jewels. I'm translating things across space and time, so like English is not capturing it, but three jewels, three precious things for our lives. And Buddha, in this case, not like a spiritual figure out there. It's like this idea of Buddha nature, that each human has this potential to like deeply love and care. That every one of us has this nature that's a precious thing. So the Buddha is precious in each of us, this quality of awakening, of care. The Dharma, which are teachings that help us to cultivate that quality. And then the Sangha, the community, that we don't do this alone. So it's like kind of interesting. So it's right at the heart of it. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
You have a wonderful depth of knowledge, and I really appreciated your talk. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
I have a hardware question.
Also, I appreciate your voice.
Thanks. Appreciate it. I have a hardware question.
Yeah.
You touched briefly kind of on the non-dualist sort of reality. And when we're talking about mindfulness, we're typically like mind is in the word, right? So we're usually talking about this separation. And when we're putting the body into it, we're kind of referring to like the mind of the body being the nervous system.
Yeah.
And what I'm curious about is, first of all, because this is, I never went to university. I get my information from a lot of probably really bad places. So I'm very curious if you've heard of this thing called polyvagal theory.
Mm-hmm.
And then also because also the way that we refer to mindfulness, we normally think of like a peaceful, tranquil state of not being activated. But I think the most like appropriate way that we can describe being mindful, being useful, is when we're actually quite active and activated. And so I was wondering if you could touch on the nervous system mechanics that operate there.
Yeah, ooh, so fun. Also, I know some folks have like bedtime, so good night if you're leaving, no worries. We'll keep going. We'll do like Q&A for like 5-10, and then we'll go into social hour, and we can also I can chat a bit more then. I love all those questions. I'm trying to decide which one. Yeah, okay. So first off, I want to say this like issue, I was calling it like a Zen hurdle, which is like, we keep hearing in the media that this is going to make me calm and reduce my anxiety. So then we have this like idea that I'm going to like close my eyes and breathe for the first time, and somehow I'll be like, oh, I'm better. I'm like, wow, that's really setting us all up to fail. You know, over and over when I hear people be like, mindfulness didn't work for me. And I'm like, what? But it's usually this, right? It's like this idea that I'm going to do this thing that's going to make me calm and not anxious. And well, here's the great news. Like over time, like that's very likely. And also like I don't practice mindfulness to never be anxious or never be angry, because we did this proof at the beginning. Like that's part of the human experience. And so I'm interested in is like, how will I relate to my anger and anxiety when it inevitably comes up? Right? Jon Kabat-Zinn says, we can't stop the waves. We can learn to surf them. And so I think for me, Thich Nhat Hanh has this great concept about a cabin that he was like working in. He left the doors and windows open, went for a walk, a storm blew through, everything got like messed up and destroyed. And so he walks back to this cabin and he like closes the doors and windows, he cleans things up, he relights the fire. And I think this is a great conversation about like what's going on with our nervous systems with this practice. Because for me, it's like this invitation to be like a meditative practice while I'm brushing my teeth or walking home, or just asking myself for that minute between like my car and the office, like to notice myself. When you come home to yourself, right? Coming home to yourself is the heart of this practice. Connecting the mind and body, they're not separate. We have to, as humans, we like to use words and constructs because we have to, but they're really limited. When I come home to myself in a meditative practice, what I will find when I walk up that hill and open that door and walk into my cabin is the product of whatever the weather's been all day. So I might have had like this beautiful day and I get to come home and like everything's clean and my cabin's all warm and I'm like meditating and I feel great, right? Or like I've had a really stressful day and got some really bad news and like a friend I know is going through crisis and like I opened every door and window, I talked to my friends, I read my emails, I saw my colleagues, and like storms blew in. So what happens when I sit on my cushion at night and I come home to myself is that it's a mess in here, right? And so mindfulness is not asking us to not be a mess. It's not asking us to clean up that mess instantly. It is inviting us to over and over know how to find our way home. Because if we don't know what's here, we can't take care of it. And so it's a practice of like opening our front door and with love and kindness, like saying hello to whatever we find there. That's the start of the practice, and that is a lifetime of work. And so all the frameworks that we have, the apps you might find, like whatever is your flavor of this practice, I just really invite you to do, and to know that you're doing it well. So just to non-dualism. We're like, mindfulness is non-dualistic. That is the aim, to not label things as right or wrong or good or bad or better or worse. It's like accepting what is here, not the acceptance of like, oh, there's a system of oppression, it's fine. It's the acceptance of like, I accept that racism exists. Like, if I don't accept that, I'm not gonna deal with it. That's a great place to start. So like, it's like a balance. People hear acceptance in this and they're like, wait, does that mean being okay with it? No, no, no. We don't have to be okay that we're a mess, but it's like, can we understand it? Can we look into like, why is this here? And can I then think of what I want to do to like step forward and care for that? So it's an interesting, there's a lot more I could say. Polyvagal theory, I'm not I'm not an expert in it, but I'm in a thread with other mindfulness people who are talking about it today. So I will leave that there. How am I doing for time? Should we, one more question, you pick, and then we'll. Okay, and then I'll be around. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, good.
Yeah. Fantastic talk. Thank you. The way you're talking about mindfulness and being in the present versus like stopping and thinking and like ruminating, sounds like why not just be mindful like all the time? If I can do it while walking, or why can't I do it like during my job and during the talk and like 24/7?
Yes. I mean, yeah, like, I mean, if you find a way to do it 24/7, like, please let us know. I would love that. And no, but and like, yes, of course. So I think it's fun to play with this. So like, why can't we do it all the time? I would propose has something to do with how we're wired and the human experience of like your default mode network. Like, your default is to mind wander. And there's actually some really healthy benefits to that. Mind wandering, your DMN, is associated with pro-social behavior because it's the time that we tend to wander to like, am I safe? Like, what was that impact on that thing? Like, if we never thought about like kind of drift around like, oh, like I talked to that person and like it didn't feel great, and like, oh, maybe I should change how I was doing that. Like, there's kind of reasons to mind wander. And if we do it all the time, we have no agency over it. If we can't ever stop anxiously being like, oh, but did that person like me? Like, that's exhausting. And so it's like this interesting dance between like the human experience of like fear, anxiety, mind wandering, and then having those moments of clarity. And kind of to what you're saying, those like, but why can't I try it all the time? Like, yes, exactly. That's like, this is perfect. It brings us back to the title of tonight's talk. Beyond the cushion is my, my question to each of you as like researchers of your own lives. Your N of one, the longest relationship you'll ever have is with yourself. You have to spend time with yourself every moment. And so to your point, I love this, right? Like, and this is the slide, right? How do you transfer some of what you've heard tonight into your context? You are the best researcher for that. And play with it. So yes, it shows up like when I'm working, I have like a little like cushion at my desk. And like in the afternoons when I can, Plum Village app, there's like some monks who will just do like a 10-minute body scan. And I just like lie down on the ground and I do that. At the start of meetings, you can do this implicitly and explicitly. Like, you don't have to tell someone, I'm gonna mindfully listen to you. To be like, can I be kind and curious to this human in front of me? You can just do that anytime. So yes, bring it in 24/7, and if you start levitating and manage that, like, let us know. So yeah, thank you again so much. We'll be sticking around. I'll hand it back to you. Thank you.